Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome to the poem of the day for today, Monday, September the 22nd, 2025. This will be our second day of the short Elizabeth Bishop retrospective or deep dive, if you will. I'm going to continue reading poems from her 1977 collection, Geography 3, which is a rather short collection when you consider some others that might number some 30 or so poems. I believe this one's only 10. And the first poem I did on episode 15, which was in the waiting room. Yesterday we did Crusoe in England. And some of the things that we've talked about regarding those poems are Bishop's reliance upon memory and an almost impossible attention to minute detail within memory that shows how mundane everyday things can be viewed from a different perspective and imbued with this significance that might not be apparent and obvious upon first glance, but also the way in which familiar places can be made strange and foreign by looking at them really closely and by paying attention to those details. So with Crusoe in England, we heard it not just with the narrator acclimating oneself to the new life on the island, but also then at the end when he was back in England and England became something different and strange and foreign to him then, something that used to be home. Speaking of different perspectives on home, the poem today is called Night City, and then the subtitle is From the Plane. So she's letting us know right away from what position we're viewing something, and that's from thousands of feet in the air. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of flying in an airplane, or if you did, if you had the ability to look out the window, particularly on takeoff and descent, and to look down and see the way in which the scale is just kind of intimidating and mind-blowing, that the things that when you're down on the ground seem enormous: houses, city blocks, miles, yards, parks, football fields. It seemed like Legos when you're when you're that high up. It kind of makes you think of that image of the universe where the Earth is, just the tiniest of dots there. And it gives you a different perspective on things, one that is kind of awe-inspiring in certain ways. And it makes you think a lot about your position in the world and within communities a little bit differently. It's also interesting to look over when you're passing over states, if you're from the United States like I am. We already know that state boundaries are mostly arbitrary. Some are drawn by rivers, but even still, the idea that a river would necessarily break land into two distinct governing bodies is something that we obviously made up. But when you're on a plane, everything, all of those lines, highways, even gates, become much harder to see and much less significant. And I think that's an important perspective for us to get a lot of the time. So here's Night City from the Plane by Elizabeth Bishop, 1977. No foot could endure it. Shoes are too thin. Broken glass, broken bottles, heaps of them burn. Over those fires no one could walk, those flaring acids and variegated bloods. The city burns tears. A gathered lake of aquamarine begins to smoke. The city burns guilt. For guilt disposal, the central heat must be this intense. Diaphanous lymph, bright turgid blood spatter outward in clots of gold. To where run, molten, in the dark environs, green and luminous silicate rivers. A pool of bitumen, one tycoon wept by himself, a blackened moon. Another cried a skyscraper up. Look, incandescent, its wires drip. The conflagration fights for air in a dread vacuum. The sky is dead. Still there are creatures, careful ones, overhead. They set down their feet. They walk. Green, red, green, red. Okay. So another challenging poem here from Bishop. This poem is, I believe, 40 lines long. There are 10 stanzas, each have 4 lines. So we have 10 quatrains. And there's what seems to be just kind of accidental rhyme in places in this poem, or accidental slant rhyme. We have lake and smoke. Then you get, sorry, what was the other one here? Up and drip, which aren't quite rhymes, but they feel close. Blood and gold again feel close. They're close enough that I think by the end of the line, whether they rhyme or not, she's asking us to associate particular words with one another, like blood and gold. This poem, at least the way I'm reading it, in addition to the preamble that I gave about different perspectives from being this high up, seems to be about the way in which humans see the earth and use the earth. I think this is a poem about the abuse of the earth's natural resources. I think you could read it in a lot of ways about a poem about waste and pollution, about climate change. And the places that I'm seeing that have to do with the way that it begins with this image of broken glass and broken bottles, and then the burning that goes with that. That no foot could endure it. That's the beginning. So you couldn't walk barefoot upon the earth. That the invention of shoes becomes something necessary because there's just destruction and discarded things that litter the streets. And at the end, as a kind of bookend to that first stanza, we get still there are creatures, careful ones overhead. They set down their feet, they walk. And those careful creatures, I think, have to be the animals, not the humans. Although the last line then says green, red, which to me sounds like a stoplight. And obviously, animals don't obey traffic lights, so perhaps the careful creatures here are the ones who are more mindful of this, the ones who are going to be surviving and kind of living their lives in the new and polluted world. But if we think about it in terms of animals, which is my first inclination, the green and red could also be uh, the green life, the verdantness of nature taking the earth back. And the red could be blood. We get blood mentioned throughout this poem, I think twice. Variegated bloods in the second stanza, and then in the fifth stanza, bright turgid blood. So that there will be, perhaps the last stanza is suggesting there will be rebirth and repopulation of the earth, but it will be kind of watered by the blood of the things that died as a result of industrial waste before. And I like that green, red, as it sounds like, kind of walking, the steps walking there. And it reminds me of this thing, I think it was George Carlin said, and I'll censor it just in case there happens to be anyone young watching, that, paraphrasing, in terms of climate change and in terms of global warming, the earth is going to be fine. It's us who are in trouble. And his idea there, which I think is somewhat supported by science, is that if human beings disappeared, it wouldn't really take that long for nature to come back, but also then to just kind of cover up the things that we did to the planet. I mean, it would take some hundreds of thousands of years, but that's not, hundreds or thousands of years. That's not really a very long time in the grand scheme of things. We even saw nature kind of start to make a comeback during the lockdown, the COVID lockdown, when people weren't going outside or driving or burning things. Even within a short period of time, nature and the climate responded just a little bit to our absence. And that's something that I think of when reading this poem, and it sounds like the kind of thoughts you would get from being in a plane and looking down upon the rest of the world from a different perspective. One where humans are not front and center, and one where humans are not the biggest player that you see around you all the time. I want to just hit on a couple other lines that are evocative to me. Line 9, the city burns tears. When I think of burning and tears, I think of tear gas, but that it's burning tears is really confusing for me and intriguing because it sounds like an evaporation. of water, but it also it sounds a little bit like burns with tears, even though she doesn't write with. That a part of the burning is a part of the crying. And then 4 lines later, the city burns guilt. And what I think is interesting with that is that the guilt disposal that she mentions in the next line, the central heat must be intense for guilt disposal. So the burning of industrial materials to get them out of sight, out of mind, is not only to make it more convenient for us to have more space, but is also a way of not having to stare and look at the waste that you've created. So this burning of things she's talking about being a way of disposing of guilt as well, which I think is a pretty appropriate and incisive way of looking at this. Another line that I just want to pay attention to that I think is really interesting is in the 8th stanza, talking about the tycoons. Another cried a skyscraper up. So the one tycoon wept by himself, another cried a skyscraper up. And to me, that suggests that it's a way of foretelling our response to these things, not by having despair. The people who are in charge, who could be making these big decisions about how we deal with industrial waste and what we use to produce the material objects that we think we need, but that the response, the crying response, is just to raise another skyscraper. So it's a way of ignoring things by doubling down on them. And the last thing I just want to point out here is there's actually 2 things. Stanzas 6 and 7, or 5 and 6, I think are the only stanzas that actually run together. All the other stanzas are a single unit ending at a period. And I'm going to read them again just so that we can think about why they might run together. Diaphanous lymph, bright turgid blood splatter outward in clots of gold, to where run molten in the dark environs green and luminous silicate rivers. I think this is the place where Mother Earth is most clearly compared to a human body within the poem. And so the description spans the middle of the poem. It joins together the 5th and the 6th, the exact middle parts of the poem together, bridging across 2 stanzas. And I think then with the content of those 2 stanzas, they're also bridging together the human body and the natural body through an analogy. And so stylistically, what Bishop's doing here, I think, is really underscoring that idea that the earth is a body somewhat like ours. And when we extract things like gold or parts of the environment, that it runs like blood. And it actually just made me think of, like, in the film There Will Be Blood, when they strike oil and it shoots up. It almost looks like you hit a vein and the earth is bleeding uncontrollably there, which seems to be in line with some of the things that Bishop's talking about. I was going to talk briefly about the line, the 5th to last line, "The sky is dead," which is a very cold, objective, harsh line. And it would end the poem, except that the last stanza about the creatures that are walking, green and red, is entirely in parentheticals. And I know from some upcoming poems that Bishop will make use of parentheticals in interesting ways to kind of offer a second voice into the poem for a minute. So there's a sense in which this poem was supposed to end at stanza 9 with "the conflagration fights for air in a dread vacuum. The sky is dead." But then the hope that's given in the parenthetical is that the earth will rebound with or without us. And that's a sobering thought. So yeah, you can see, if you haven't read Bishop before, just within these first 2 poems, we have themes of nature, geography, humans' relationship with nature, estrangement, feeling at home within a place, being a part of nature and yet separate from it, sometimes in opposition to it. And yet within these 2 poems, her style and her structure, or her genre, vary pretty drastically, even one of them being in first person, not from her perspective, but from a fictional characters. And then this one being something that you can imagine is thoughts and observations that she might have had while taking a flight and looking down upon a city. So for me, she's a poet of tremendous depth and insight, but also of tremendous range. And I hope to be able to further explore that throughout this series later this week. Thank you again for joining us and for listening. And until next time, I wish peace be with you all.